Hello, beautiful ones, and welcome to another episode of Taking Time to Heal. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you have had a gorgeous month, a gorgeous summer, beginning of summer. I have to admit, there has been a little bit of chaos at this end. I feel like I was well and truly hit by Mercury retrograde this year. So I wanted to kind of speak into that a little bit before we dive into today's episode. So just to update you on some of the beautiful chaos that's been happening at this end. So about 2 weeks ago, I lost complete access to my platform, which is where I store all my courses. It's where all my membership information is held. It's also where my email system is. It's where my podcast is uploaded in audio form. And it's where my website's hosted. So I've had a real mare of tech issues over the past 2 weeks. And it's been really interesting actually to look back on that time and realize, actually, do you know what? You didn't freak out, Holly, and that was quite good. And I managed to kind of navigate it with a little bit of grace, little bit. I won't say complete grace because there certainly were a few expletives used along the way. But it was really lovely to take the time to look back over that and go, oh, okay, you handled that differently to you a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. And one of the reasons I'm sharing this is one of the things that really stops us from moving forward is something that's really inbuilt into our culture, especially in the UK. So I'm talking mainly to the UK here. I'm not sure how this presents so much in, say, American culture or even other parts of Europe. I'm not sure. But I think many of us in the UK can really resonate with this idea of modesty being a really big quality, and to the point that we don't like to highlight within ourselves anything we're doing well, anything that's going well, anything that may require us to celebrate or feel good about ourselves. You know, often it can turn into this really unhealthy having the blinkers on to anything that's going good. And it is really, you know, it is such an important part of feeling good and being in your best possible state, is remembering to take the time to celebrate the wins, you know, to reflect on the things that actually you have improved in, or the things that you're so much better at now than you ever used to be. Because I don't only think this is part of our culture, I think it's also something that's really woven into the healing and spiritual development world, or the personal development world, where there's this constant sense of not enoughness. And what I mean by that is not enough. You know, there's always more healing work to do, right? We never stop that journey of growth. But it is also equally important to really check in with yourself and go, oh yeah, I am shifting, I am changing. Yeah, things I used to do, I don't do anymore. Those things I used to really freak out about, I don't do that anymore. You know, it's really important to take the time to celebrate those wins, because sometimes you need things to look back on when it's tough again, right? You need to know that you are making progress when it all feels a bit thankless. And when you feel like, oh my God, I'm putting in the work, but I'm not seeing the results. Often the results of, you know, this inner work we do, or even eating differently and moving our bodies differently, sometimes it can take a little while for those results to show up in a way that feels really tangible. And it's because we're missing a lot of the little moments that happen in between that we just didn't pay attention to because it felt uncomfortable or icky or self-involved or not modest, right? So it's one of the practices I've started doing a lot more consciously. And actually, my journal is really good because it reminds me at the end of the week to celebrate my wins, to really look back on what's going well, what am I pleased about, what am I happy about. And what I did used to do is focus those on a lot of really, I suppose, physical, tangible things. I might have, gained a new client. I might have, I don't know, had a really lovely day with the family. But actually, I've now started trying to include at least one of them to reflect on me as a person, me as someone that's, working towards her personal goals around healing. So whether that's, so say for example, I'm working on my self-esteem, and one of those wins might be, do you know, when I put my makeup on the other day, I didn't immediately flinch. It can be that small, because actually it's those little things that add up to make massive difference. So I just wanted to share that with you going into this episode, which may or may not be relevant for you, but at this time of year, according to Ayurveda, we've had that real kind of build up of fire energy. And in that fire energy, we can often lose ourselves in our goals, in our future, and the thing we're trying to create. That adrenaline takes over and just becomes this kind of addictive substance that we want more and more and more of. And we lose sight of some of the softer things, the love, the care, the attention that we might need, as well as our heart tends to close down a little bit, right? It becomes very logical, very brain orientated, very kind of just go, go, go. And so it's really important during this time of year, Ayurvedically speaking, to really lean into those heart-opening practices, those things that really do make you appreciate, that make you connect in with that feeling of love for others. And yeah, taking the time to celebrate. This is the season of celebration. We're now in that harvest season where we get to really take stock of all of the beautiful things that we've created this year. Even, like, say, if those beautiful things might look tiny to someone else. Okay, so we are going into the next Huna principle. And this Huna principle is called mana, which, like all of them, sound really obvious. And you'll be like, well, I know that. But I would invite you to really sit with it. Okay, it's in the depth of these that we get the real nourishment, that we get the real medicine. Because we may know something logically, but are we behaving accordingly is the question I always try and come back to with myself. So mana is all power comes from within. And this is, again, a lovely, beautiful reminder if you're on a healing journey. It's a beautiful reminder that as much as there's all these people, me included, all these practices, all of these spiritual tools and therapies and healing modalities, our actual power just still resides within us, and we're not going to find it out there. It's inside that we really connect into that sense of strength, certainty, those feelings of safety, those feelings of you can adapt, you can change whatever life throws at you. That kind of real stability can only be found from within. And so just thinking about this principle, and I'm just thinking about how it really showed up for me. You know, I shared about my meditation course that I went on in previous episodes that absolutely transformed my life. But I think back to that time when, prior to that, I realized, well, I didn't realize at the time, it's only in hindsight that I can see this, right? But I can now see that prior to that meditation course, that really understanding of myself, that real in-depth self-inquiry, I could see how I was just seeking everything I wanted. And the irony was, the minute I started meditating, the minute I started, you know, really tuning into my own intuition, my own awareness, my own beliefs and thought patterns that came from me and not from conditioning, the minute I could, you know, just access those layers, I started to see just how much of my power I'd been giving away to other people and circumstances and whatever was going on for me at the time, the things I'd experienced in the past, the upbringing I'd had, you know, all of these things, I'd just given my power away to them. Because what I was unconsciously saying a lot of the time was, I cannot change. My life cannot change. You know, as much as I was working towards my goals, I was equally making a lot of excuses. And so this mana, this Huna principle, reminds us that actually in that seeking, in that listening to other people's opinions ahead of what it feels like in your system, that whole following someone else's route, following someone else's journey. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I certainly feel like my 20s was like this kind of tick sheet that I felt I had to go through, you know, get married, have the kids, buy the house, get the career, or like train for the career, get the career, work at the career, work up in the career, get promoted in the career. And it just felt like I was doing all of this stuff and I didn't know why. Like any kind of meaning around it just lost that connection to me. And it's one of the things I did know about myself quite early on was, if my heart's not in something, I can't do it. It's like I physically cannot apply myself to that thing, no matter how hard I try. So I always have to be really conscious of, is my heart in this thing? And I could start to see this, you know, we'd probably call it a dark night of the soul, this period where I was just like, whose life is this? I don't know whose life this is. And my body was really screaming at me with inflammation, and it, like, looking back, it feels so pointless and it feels so sad. But at the same time, I'm really aware that I had to go through that process, right, of giving my power away to so many people, to so many things, to other people's expectations, to, you know, cultural norms, to anything that just allowed me to fit in, right, and do the right thing. Do the right thing was a big thing for me. And, you know, I still believe, and I need to be careful with how I word this, right, because beliefs are powerful, but I still believe that fundamentally all of us are good-natured when we are not living in survival mode, right? So I think you give people the adequate resources, and you give people the adequate resources to work with what's within, and you will find that most people actually want to do something for the betterment of us as a collective. You know, once your immediate needs are met, then of course you want to do something for the whole. But when we're stuck in that survival mode of feeling like our needs aren't met, or even when we have enough, it's not enough, you know, it actually makes it very difficult to be the version of you that actually is probably the most used to us collectively. What I also want to say, I'm saying that and just laughing at how awful that sounds, but because I also want to say that even when we're not there, you know, we're still meaningful, right? We're still contributing in a meaningful way just by our presence. Whoever you are in any moment is enough. And the minute you start feeling that and accepting that, you step out of survival mode, because there's nothing to get angsty about. There's nothing to really, there's nothing to prove. That's what I want to say. There's nothing to prove. And that in itself, when we reach that stage, also brings up that whole kind of dark night of the soul. That dark night of the soul where we start feeling like, oh my gosh, I've created this life, and you know, perhaps elements of it are not even me. They never came from me. They came from something culture told me I should want, or they told me, you know, my parents thought that was a good idea, or, you know, all of these things start occurring to you, and you're like, ah. And if I'm honest, I feel like this is one of the hardest parts of this journey, because you're basically starting again. You're basically trying to figure out, who is that you? Who is that real you? And how much of what you enjoy is actually because you enjoy it? Or how much of what you actually experience and the way you experience it is because that's how it is, or that's because of the lens you're putting on it? And so it can make everything a little bit confusing. And you're starting from scratch, and you're having to experiment. So, I need to try this thing, but from the point of view of being really present and seeing, actually, do I enjoy this? Or is this something that I've taught myself to enjoy? Or told myself to enjoy? Because everyone else is. So if you are in this stage, I suppose I just want to remind you to be gentle with yourself. I've got quite a few clients that are navigating this at the moment, and it's probably why it's come up and is, you know, really live for me right now. But this stage can be a place where we can feel really vulnerable, because we haven't got such a certain identity anymore. We haven't got such certainty to hold us together. Perhaps those walls have started to dissipate and break down, and we're now trying to figure out, who's this version of me? Who's this version of me that's emerging without that baggage that I've let go of? Now, sometimes this happens in a big bang. Sometimes it's I remember I went on a retreat, and I had a real kind of big perspective shift after that. And I remember it was a Zen teacher, or Zen master, who he was like, don't go ending your marriages after this. Don't go quitting your jobs, right? Because we have this initial kind of high after a breakthrough, an awakening. And, immediately we can start to see everything that needs to change. And we can feel this impulsiveness to go do it now. It can almost feel jarring to live in a life that really doesn't feel like you. And so at some point you probably do need to address it, but it's giving yourself a chance to let that settle, get really clear on what it is that you do want before you start destroying everything you already have. So so after you've done that initial awakening bit, then, like I say, comes this period of, so what do I want? What might that look like? And experimenting to say, I'm just going to try, I'll try this on. And this is the bit I wanted to talk into, was give yourself permission to do that, right? You don't need to have all the answers right now. You get to just go out and explore and try this thing on and try that thing on, and even in little liberating ways. So instead of saying yes to that thing, can you give yourself permission to say no? Or, the opposite end of the scale, those things that you've told yourself, I'm not allowed to have that, I'm not allowed to do that, that's for other people. Can you allow yourself permission to say yes? And just see how that feels for a period, and see if you enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, why didn't you enjoy it? So remember to give yourself that opportunity to really experiment after these kind of awakenings to your own power. When you do realize how much power you have, how much control you have, the things you're already saying yes to without meaning to, the things you're already saying no to, the things that you tell yourself you have no choice, but we always have a choice, right? Everything you're doing day after day is a choice. You're choosing to do that. So when we have these awakenings to that immense power that we hold, we then have that dilemma of, and what do I want to do with it? How do I want to use my power to shape my life, to shape the life of those that I love, to actually, one of the things that came through for me, and is often the case when we go through a period of awakening, is we get to a certain point and we're like, but there's a load of other people still struggling with this thing. And we feel that real desire to go back and help, because, no one wants to thrive alone, right? We want to help the people that are still in that state that felt really uncomfortable and unfulfilling and so frustrating, because you're not fulfilled with your life, you don't know what you want to do, it feels like you should know, there's so much expectation. So I have gone down a completely different rabbit hole to where I expected this to go. But this idea of mana, the power resides within. The other thing I wanted to talk about in regards to this is, we've just gone to the extreme level of awakening to your power and feeling it and owning it and taking responsibility for your life and for your circumstances and for where you are and how you're feeling and all of those things, right? So there's that. And then there's also remembering that we can call our power back at any time, right? And one thing I find really helpful when it comes to this idea of inner power, for me, is to check in with all elements myself. So I tend to know I'm in my power when I feel like my mind, body, and soul are working together as a team, right? It's like we're all on the same page, we're all operating towards the same goal, and it feels good, and I can access flow, and I'm able to move forward with. And when I say certainty, I don't necessarily mean certainty around where I'm going or what my next step will be, but certainty around the fact that, I've survived this long. I can cope with probably whatever the universe has got to throw at me. And some of those things are going to be painful, and some of those things are going to be beautiful. And can I be present for it all? Can I be here for it all? And when I come at life, or when I come to life with this outlook of, or with this sensation, it's a full body somatic, right? Of, and when I say, what I mean by that is, when I'm in my power, my posture changes. It's not just, it's very difficult to be in my power and be hunched over. Whereas actually that kind of natural lifting of the chest, the shoulders back, we feel that, our body feels that, and automatically we start to feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more alert, but not in an anxious way. We're not tense, but there's a relaxed ease, but with presence is what I want to say. So be mindful of that. If you're struggling to access your power in a situation, notice, what's your body language doing? What's your posture doing? Is it looking powerful, or are you feeling vulnerable? And what I would say to that is, you can also find power in vulnerability. It's allowing that to be your truth and allowing that to be okay. Again, we've gone down a side alley. So that's how I would work with the body in that moment of where I feel like I've lost my power, I've gone into my inner child, I've gone into a disempowered part of me. Then one of the first things I do as a check-in is, what's my body doing? So that can be really helpful just in the moment, in a meeting, in an interview, in an exam. But another way I can access my power quite quickly is to notice, we've done a lot of work on this now, so I'm sure you're well versed, and you probably were before, let's be honest. But notice, what's my mind doing? Okay, so my mind might be currently telling me about how perhaps I've gone into the inner critic, right? Perhaps my inner critic has gone into overdrive and is screaming at me. Or perhaps my inner panicker Yeah, my inner catastrophizer has decided to take leading role in my head today. And so when I notice that, often I need to take a moment to sit and connect to the breath, maybe take a couple of deep breaths, reset that nervous system. It doesn't take much to reset the nervous system. I find just using the belly as a focus point as you focus on the rise and fall of the breath often is enough to just bring you back to your core self, back to that adult self, back to your power. So basically, I'm trying to think where I was going with this. Yes, so the inner critic has perhaps taken over, and we connect back into the breath, ground ourselves, and then the next step is kind of like, okay, is this helpful? Is this a helpful thought pattern with what I've got to do today, with what I need to achieve today, with what's going on for me in this moment? 9 times out of 10, it'll be, it's not helpful. So the second question I tend to ask myself is, so in terms of this part of me has got something it is trying to do, right? Something it's trying to achieve. So what is that? What's the intention behind this inner critic stepping forward? Often it'll be, oh, well, you didn't seem to be paying attention to this thing, and we've got this thing coming up, so I thought if I just told you how rubbish you are for a while, then you might actually do something about it. It's like, right, okay, so the objective was to get this task done. Right, okay. Well, actually, continuing to criticize myself in this way is actually sapping my energy rather than giving me the energy I need to do the task. So what would be something else that might feel more helpful to me right now, but still achieves the same aim? Well, I could look at what I need to do to get this task done right now. Okay, well, let's do that. And so I will often do that practice in my journal. I find that easier than, meditating on it. However, the conversation I've just had with you, as if I was talking to different parts, I've done that out loud when I'm driving in the car. So, I might be driving somewhere and I notice my energy's flat, or I've just got, no motivation. So I might say, Holly, what's going on? And then I will continue to have this conversation back and forth until I get to the root. And then I'm like, oh, okay. So I just need to, let go of that thing, or rewire the way I'm looking at that, shift my perspective about that thing. And so these tiny little coaching conversations that I often have with myself, like say in my journal, sometimes out loud, depends who's around. These can actually work really quickly to get you back in your power and also back into what it is that you need to do. So that would kind of be my other tip around that. And then the heart. We talk about the heart or the soul. I think I said, body, mind, and soul, but body, mind, and heart, same thing. Well, same thing, not same thing. That could be a whole different thing. So the other thing is if our body and our mind is aligned and, we're feeling in our power, but we're not feeling in our power, then this is where we need to come to the heart, right? So this is often, there's a part of us, again, we can use that kind of parts work, like I just explained, where you talk to the different parts, like we do in internal family systems, or, like Carl Jung talked about in terms of the collective unconscious, and our shadow parts. So we need to check in with the heart. We need to see what's going on. So if we're not feeling in our power, often it can be because there's an emotion, there's something going on underneath the surface. And so we need to take the time to really look at what that is, because otherwise it's like you're trying to live your life with only half your energy in it. And it can make life really difficult, really challenging. So often with the heart space, we can't deal with it in the same kind of logical way that we did when working with the mind. Sometimes, with our emotions, they're meant to be felt. They're not meant to be analysed. They're not meant to be investigated. So this is where I'll often lean into the somatics. So what I mean by that is I'll sit with the emotion and observe it like sensation and really feel it. So I might notice that my anxiety is more prickly on one side. I might notice that my grief feels really loud in a particular spot. Or, some people are more visual in this approach, and like they might see it like a color or a shape, and it has a weight to it, right? There's a feeling of weight, an energetic weight of different emotions. So noticing all of those different qualities, allowing yourself to be with it, and then what you tend to find is emotions will pass through themselves within 90 seconds. If an emotion continues on past that point, generally what's happening is the brain's kicked in and it has started to feed that emotion with a narrative. So the narrative might be, say for example, you feel anxious. You might find the brain starts kicking in and telling you all of the things that could possibly go wrong in this situation. So that anxiety continues. What I would say is there's also very physical reasons some of these symptoms, some of these emotions manifest as well. But today we'll just focus, we'll come to that one day. We'll come to that where we'll look at the ways imbalance in the body shows up in our emotions. It's a really interesting topic. But for now, so giving ourselves the opportunity to feel the emotions without the brain feeding it, without the brain trying to justify it, without the brain criticizing it. Because this is what often happens in the emotional body, right? We're not allowed, according to the brain, to feel some things, or we try and talk ourselves out of other emotions, and we make them feel like they don't have a place. The truth is, we came here to experience it all, right? That's why we've got this beautiful, widespread set of emotions within us, so that we can experience the abundance and the enormity of life. So it's really important that we build a relationship with our emotions, so none of them are demonized, none of them are made to feel wrong or unwelcome, right? And when we do that, we find that our suffering, I want to say suffering because this reminds me of, it's similar to some of the teachings in Buddhism, but our suffering is lessened when we stop fighting stuff, right? We don't need to fight that emotion. And also we start to see, there's real medicine in this emotion. It's really highlighting something to me. Now, that's not to say, right, that our emotions are often triggered by something that's in the subconscious. So not all of those emotions. So basically, the enormity of our emotions in a moment is basically affected by that which we're bringing into that moment. So this is what we mean by being triggered, right? So we're experiencing something in this situation, but actually to us it feels more extreme or bigger than it is because of what we've experienced back there. So we start reliving that emotion that was initially triggered. I think that makes sense. I'm hoping that makes sense. And I'm sure you are all probably well versed around what a trigger is. But if you're not, and you don't know what you don't know, so don't worry about that. So I have completely lost my train of thought. Right, so we're going back to this idea of the heart and needing to feel, right? So to work with this heart space, we need to give our emotions space. We need to allow them to be seen. We don't need to justify them. We don't need to tell them that they're right. And yes, that person did overstep their boundary. Do you know what I mean? But we can observe and go, oh yeah, that was because of that thing that's happened. And I'm still feeling a little bit upset by that. And do I want to do something with that? Is that something I need to have a conversation with that person around? Or is that something that I'm going to change the way I deal with in the future by doing X, Y, and Z? So our emotions carry so much wisdom and deserve to be seen and deserve to be felt. And we're in our power with our emotions when we see that and when we can be with that. Now, I'm also really aware that if those emotions are intense, if they feel consuming, is the word I want to use, then this work can feel pretty much impossible to do on your own, right? This is why, we were designed to co-regulate. We were designed to be safe in community. We're tribe animals, right? We're not these kind of little isolated souls. We're designed to be part of a tribe. And so we're designed to co-regulate with others, and not just as children. I'm sure all of us, I didn't want to admit it for a really long time, but I'm sure all of us completely understand the value of support in our life and how meaningful it is when someone you care about says something reassuring, or on those times you're having a tough day, someone says something and it just picks you back up and you're like, oh yeah. So what I would say is, don't get into self-judgment around this regulation piece if you're finding it tough and you were never taught to regulate as a child. Like many of us weren't, right? We came from generations that had different priorities, but they were, each generation we try and progress. So this is not about, blaming parents or anything. Our ancestors have done amazing. But yeah, there's some things that perhaps we can improve on, like anything. So regulation is one of probably the most life-changing skills you can ever learn. And it can be very difficult to do that in isolation. There's also a real part of us that needs, and I know this is probably a really unpopular opinion, but there is a part of us that needs to be validated from the outside. And what I mean by that is just to know that we're safe in community, just to know that we can trust the people around us, just to know that the people around us care and have our interests at heart. So I genuinely believe that's a fundamental human need, and pretending it's not actually just makes life harder. So co-regulation don't forget how important it is. Don't feel like you're going to do it all on your own. And on that point, it does feel like a really good time to kind of mention that we do have the Medicine Woman Collective, which is my membership space. And I don't want this to sound like some kind of sales pitch in any way, but I do want to highlight that that community is there. And it is a community of women who are working on themselves, for the life they want to create, for their spiritual practice. Often, we incorporate the spiritual into our work, but I never tell you what to believe, right? I don't tell you which path to follow. I don't tell you this religion's right and this one's wrong. I don't believe that. I believe there's wisdom in them all, and I believe that the more we can communicate that wisdom to each other, and also we start to see like just how many similarities there are down the different paths. Don't get me wrong, there's also a lot of differences, but I like to think, well, for me, I tend to think the ultimate wisdom is the wisdom that we see reflected in all the paths, right? That's the important stuff. That's the stuff that was so important that everyone across the globe somehow seemed to know, which just blows my mind. So whatever path you're on in terms of your spiritual practice, or choosing not to have one, you are very welcome in that space. I just wanted to say, and it is a space where we take the time to regulate, where we take the time to turn inward, to ask ourselves those deeper questions, and to really make sure we're getting the most from our human experience, and to also have that support available when we're not, and to have people around that actually will listen and see you and not feel the need to fix you. Yeah, it's a beautiful space. And actually, I say it every time and it sounds really cliche, but I'm going to say it again, which is I genuinely couldn't have been luckier with the women that have chosen to join that space, because they really are such a beautiful group of lovely, open-hearted women who are just so kind. That's what I want to say, really kind, and I feel really honored to hold them in that space. So if you want to join us, please feel free to come and claim your free trial. I do a 14-day free trial so that you can check it's what you're looking for. And we have regular events, moon circles, seasonal events, workshops, courses. At the moment, we have just begun a 4-week live course called Reclaiming Your Peace. So we're working through the different layers of self. We have just begun looking at the physical body and the external, where we're losing our peace in the external, where we're losing our peace in terms of the rhythms that we're creating in our life. And then over the next few weeks, we're going to look at the other layers, which is we're going to look at the mental body, the emotional body. We're going to look at the spiritual body. And I can already feel it's got a really lovely feeling to it. And everything, all of those are recorded and held on the platform, along with a whole library of previous courses and events. And we also do this really awesome thing, which I love. And what I love is the feedback is people love it too. But it's something that evolved in my kind of morning practice, which is where initially I'd do yoga, and then as I had a flare up last year, I had a really bad flare up, and my mobility just really declined. And I was finding that some of the yoga, it was just too much for me. It was too much for my knees, it was too much for my ankles, nothing could really cope. But at the same time, my body needed some form of movement. So I gave myself permission to just do this intuitive, mindful movement where it was kind of a cross between yoga, dance, meditation, where I would close my eyes and I would just let my body guide me on what it needed that day. And that's something we come together and do once a month inside the membership, and it's a really lovely experience because we also try different musics and yeah, different approaches and different meditations as we're doing it. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. So lovelies, if you would like to join us in there, I will put the link below in the show notes. But otherwise, I will be back next week for another episode where we will be concluding our journey into the Huna principles. Take care, and I will see you soon.